Early in the house renovation process, we were challenged with figuring out what we wanted to do. The living room is a good size, but it was kind of closed off from the house. These double doors were the main entrance, but we wanted to open it up and make it more inviting and give the house a more open feel. My wife is a big fan of the crown molding throughout the house, so I was challenged with removing this wall while keeping the crown molding intact. I started by removing the double doors. They were pretty cool looking and had some character to them. I wanted to keep them and ended up repurposing them at the other end of the dining room. I had just started taking off the molding and realized that maybe I should lay down some protective covering on the floor so it doesn't get destroyed. Even if we were going to refinish it down the road, which we did, it would be good to not have any unnecessary dents in it. Okay, now it's time to start destroying some stuff. The molding came off super easy. Just took a pry bar and some elbow grease. The walls weren't too tricky. It's a layer of plaster on top of a layer of drywall underneath, which makes for a really dusty combination. It just makes a big mess. I was careful to not cut away too much drywall near the edge of the opening. If I cut away too much, it would be a bit trickier when patching up the wall. This created so much debris, so I cleared a bunch of it out before moving on. It was unclear if this was a major supporting wall or not, but I wasn't about to take any risks. Before taking out any of the studs, I constructed and installed a massively over-engineered header beam in the attic to support, well, everything around it. I then started popping out the studs one by one. Unfortunately, some of the drywall that I was trying to preserve gave way, so that'll just have to get fixed later on. Before messing with any of the electrical, I decoded which wires and circuits controlled what and made a new plan for the electrical outlets and light switches. I turned off the power at the breaker box before disconnecting any of the wires.
Yep.
Okay. Number 5.
Off.
Which ones?
The hallway only, not the living room, not the fan.
Number 6.
Nothing.
Okay. Number 7.
Off.
That was it?
Yeah.
Really?
Let me
Okay.
test these. Give me a sec.
Can you?
Well, those are off.
What?
This?
Right there.
When running new wires, I was sure to label the wire at both ends to make it easier when it came to hooking things up. After a bit more planning, I figured out that I could cut the studs at the ends. I thought that this corner was a supporting stud by the looks of it, but clearly it's not. This is the new spot for the light switches. It'll be a 4-gang. The left switch will be a 3-way for the hallway lights. Next will be an outlet switch, then a switch for the living room ceiling fan, and finally a switch for the main living room lights. After some finagling, I got all the switches and wires connected at the box, and tested the ceiling fan light. This built-in cabinet had to go. We have other plans to eventually turn this section into a mini wine cellar, but for the meantime, we just had to take out the cabinet parts. It was almost time to start framing up the opening, but I just had to clean up a bit more of the stuff, such as some of the baseboards, the stud on the floor, and some of the plaster wall. This corner required 2 layers of studs, but since there are electrical wires running through the corner, the first layer had to be broken up into pieces to merely act as a spacer. The second layer was cut a bit short to allow space for the new header to sit on top of it. Next, it was time to put in the new header. This is a 4x4 beam cut to length and slips right into the gap at the top. It rests on top of a stud on one side, and at the other side, I screwed it into the neighboring stud with large framing screws. I made sure it was level before mounting. These large screws were countersunk into the beam so there wouldn't be any issues when patching it up with drywall. On the other side, I toe-nailed some screws to connect the beam and supporting stud. Now that the beam was in place, I trimmed out the drywall using a sawzall with a long blade. I ran it along the bottom of the beam and flush cut the excess material. I could begin patching the messed up portions of the wall. I scribed a thin piece of plywood to put on as a backer board, then put drywall right on top of it. I scribed the drywall to make as small of gaps as possible to make mudding much easier. I followed the same process for all 3 spots where chunks of the wall had fallen off. For this section of the wall, I needed to put on 2 layers of drywall to bring to the same level as the rest of the wall. I was still working by myself, so when hanging the drywall on the ceiling, I simply used a clamp to give one end of the drywall a place to rest as I secured the other end. Once all the drywall was on, I could begin the seemingly never-ending process of mudding. To be fair, this was not a relatively simple part of the wall to mud because of all the corners. Mudding has to be done in layers. You can't just gunk it on or else it'll crack. So you put on a layer, let it dry, sand it smooth, put on another layer, and repeat the process until it looks good enough to paint. Every edge requires a metal corner bead to make a clean, straight corner. It's just a bit funny that this entire thing is almost made up of outside corners. Oh, I should note that while I was opening up the living room wall, I also took this opportunity to heighten and widen the opening into the kitchen. This project was one of the first things I did on the inside when we bought the house, and it really made a big difference to the look of the house. The living room has a completely different feel, and just made us eager to get going on more projects on the inside. In addition to opening up the wall in the living room fireplace will also get a major renovation. Okay, that's it for now. See ya. Holy moly, the inside of this is a mess. Oh, you're filming? Where is it?
Hello, YouTube.
Ah, shit. I lost my light in here. No, can you go over to the attic stairs and turn on the timer?
And what?
Climb up the stairs and turn on the timer.
Where's the timer?
Go up the stairs.